No.
Good morning to all of you. Thank you for joining today's webinar entitled Eating Habits, Mindset and Opportunities, Perspectives on Food Inclusion and Accessibility, organized by Safe Food Advocacy Europe in the frame of its Food for Inclusion project supported by the ESF program of the European Union. My name is Manon Richard. I am working for SAFE, and I will have the great pleasure of moderating today's webinar. I would like to warmly thank the speakers who are joining us today and will share their thoughts on the topic. I would also like to remind the audience following us on Zoom that you can ask your questions via the Q&A box. Please make sure to mention the name of the speaker to which your question is directed. Then the speakers will write their replies directly or address them during the roundtable a bit later. So our discussions today will revolve around a very timely and important topic, the rise of global poverty and inequalities that have only been increasing since recent challenges, such as the COVID-19 crisis, and have resulted in a significant decrease in the quantity and quality of food that people can afford. So to address these issues, our panelists will analyze the relationship between access to food and social conditions, between nutritional problems and the type of food that disadvantaged people can afford. They will also demonstrate the rise in poverty. And last but not least, they will look into the issue of healthy food access from a psychological perspective. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Floriana Cimmarusti, the Secretary General of Safe Food Advocacy Europe, for her welcome and opening remarks. Floriana, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Manon. So good morning, Floriana Cimmarusti, I'm Secretary General at SAFE. Thank you to be with us today. Before introducing who we are and what we do, I will ask our colleague Augustine maybe to show just a short video to explain who is SAFE and what we do. Please, Augustine, thank you.
You are muted, Floriana.
was unmuted. Yeah, now can you hear me, right? Sorry. So SAFE in the project ESF, we receive financial support through a European operating grant through European Commission. We're really glad of this because we believe that the problem of poverty it's really getting worse and worse in the last years. I'd say we were cooperating for many years with Sant'Egidio, which is based in Brussels, where we try to help people in needs. And I can tell you that in the last years, the number of people who need support and have doubled. Before COVID already, there were around 90 homeless people once a week. But after the COVID crisis, they doubled. And now with the Ukrainian war, the number increased even more. And the situation, it's really across the whole EU. So according, for instance, to Eurostat data, in 2021, 7.3% of the overall EU population need really support, and they couldn't have a decent meal. They were unable to afford a meal in which there was fish or there was, I will say, kind of a healthy meal for them. It was very difficult to afford it. Then in 2021, 11.9% of the overall EU population faced material and social deprivation, and 6.3% several material and social deprivation. So for those people, it was a really big problem to give the opportunity to children to eat an healthy meal, a decent meal. So we realized how much this problem was growing at EU level. That's why our project, Food for Inclusion, include an healthy meal program. What does it mean? Is that we try in 15 member states to support people in need to have a meal with a very, very low price in several restaurants in those 15 member states to really support people in need. Even with our project on food waste, on reusing the food waste, we try to support those people. So today on our webinar, we will have 3 scientific reports. The first one will be given by the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, Laura Cassio, that I thanks already to be with us today. It will analyze the relationship between access to food and social condition, but I will leave Laura to explain this better to all of you. And then we have a second speaker, which again is Laura but Rossi. She's a researcher from the Italian National Institute of Nutrition, and it concerns correlation between nutritional problems and the type of food that people living in poverty are forced to buy. And the last one from our Emanuela Pavone, which is a psychologist and psychotherapist of La Sapienza University, and the problem of access to healthy food will be analyzed from the psychology perspective, which is super important to be analyzed. So thank you so much to all of you. I will give back to floor to Manon to go ahead with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Floriana, for providing more details about SAFE's mission when it comes to combating poverty, promoting social inclusion, and reducing inequalities, in particular through the Food for Inclusion project. So I will now turn to our first speaker, Laura Cassio, who is Senior Expert at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, and who will tell us more about poverty and mindset, the impact of poverty and exclusion on life prospects. Mrs. Cassio, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation. I have to say, first of all, that I'm not an expert in nutrition or, on the specific problem of food. And the work that I will present today only touches very, very marginally on this topic. So when I received the invitation, I hesitated a bit because I was thinking, does it really relate to what we are the group is discussing today? And eventually I realized that it does. Probably it may help put the issue of food poverty in a broader context of poverty. Because actually the work that I will now outline really looks at the complexity of the problem, at the vicious cycles that are inherent to the poverty issue. Now I will share my screen. Can you see it? Can you see my screen?
No, now we cannot.
Okay, so sorry, I will try again. Apologies for this. So share screen. I don't know, maybe apparently I'm not able to do it. Can you perhaps help
Sorry,
you?
Laura, I think Augustine can put
do it.
your presentation, right?
Yes, I can do it for you, no worries.
Okay, he
I
will
will
do
share
it.
it to you right away.
Or if you give me the ability to handle the presentation myself, maybe it's easier, but as you like. Or you can you have my presentation, so
If you want, I can display the presentation. Tell me if ever you need to.
No, don't worry, Laura, to make it easier, Augustine will open it for you.
okay, fine, thank you. So the work that I'm presenting today looks at a specific aspect of the problem of poverty, that is how poverty impacts on the way people take decisions, look at their future, and act in relation to their future. So maybe next slide, please. So what we should say is that poverty is an extremely complex problem. Just think of the gospel. So I mean, all the gospel is really about poverty, or a big part of it is about poverty. And here we are. I mean, meanwhile, 2,000 years after, we went to the moon. We developed so many things, but we are still stuck with poverty. Poverty, we can say it is probably the biggest obstacle to human development. And it is an extremely challenging issue to tackle. Why is it so challenging? Because it is really composed of many different aspects. There is a problem of power dynamics between groups, a group excluding another, for instance. This leads to institutions that are developing but in excluding some groups from access to resources, to opportunities, to services, and so on. But then there is also this other aspect, that the experience of poverty. Once you are in poverty, then the experience of poverty really changes you and changes the way you can take the future in your hands and come out of poverty. This aspect is a little bit less studied usually, because there may be a risk in looking into it that you equate, looking at this with blaming the poor for their situation. This is not at all, the case. This is not at all what we wanted to do with, drawing attention to this issue. We want to draw attention on how the experience of poverty affects anybody who is in poverty, any of us who would be in this situation. What we tried to do with this report that we published last year is to bring together in a narrative synthesis existing research from multiple sources, so behavioral economics, neuroscience, sociology, education studies, and try to see what research says on this topic, and also how, once we know what it says, how this can be helpful to address the problem. So, okay, I will I will give you a presentation of what we did or what the analysis says, and I will dwell a little bit on the specific problem of nutrition. So please, next slide. So one, important branch of research comes from these behavioral tests that look at the impact of scarcity. You know, there has been a very famous book that was published about 10 years ago on scarcity, and they show through experiments that the same person or the same or similar, very similar groups react in a very different way when they are in a situation of scarcity or when they are in a situation of abundance. Namely, maybe please go next slide. Apparently scarcity, or the experiments demonstrated that scarcity affects what is called the cognitive bandwidth. That is the capacity that is composed of fluid intelligence and executive control. So it means the capacity to reason, to take a very, let's say, rational consideration of the problem, to process information in a way that is useful to take a decision, and to take a decision that is based on a full assessment of the situation. A very famous experiment looked at Indian farmers before and after the harvest. So before the harvest, the IQ, it was based on a sort of IQ tests. The IQ of the same farmer before the harvest was considerably lower than after the harvest. Similar experiments show that being in a situation of poverty affects your availability to sacrifice what you have at the moment, your immediate income, to invest in the future. So, you have something that is very limited and you want to use it immediately. It is very difficult to save it for longer. All these is extremely important when you think, for instance, of education. Education is a very long-term investment. And so it is very difficult when you are in a situation, when you are in such a situation, to invest in it. And so this is something that is important to understand. Let's move on to the next bunch of research that we looked at, that is about neuroscience. So I'm not an expert on neuroscience at all, but I want to speak. Yes, this slide is good. So I want to speak with the director of one of the most important centers looking at the brain and poverty. And so the research shows that the socioeconomic background impacts on some brain functions, on some brain areas. Very importantly, this is not about genetics. So starting from exactly the same configuration of the brain at birth, with the years, throughout the years, children who are in poverty develop less some areas of the brain, and some areas that are very, very important for this decision taking. So this prefrontal cortex, that is the area that regulates the thoughts and the decision taking, these executive functions. The amygdala, that is the organ of the brain, or the part of the brain that controls the reaction to stress and emotions, this fight, flight, or freeze reaction, and the hippocampus that is responsible for memory. So think of that. Think of how a child who has a difficulty in concentrating, processing the information, reacts very quickly, impulsively when feels threatened, and has a difficulty to memorize. Think of how they will perform in education. You see, you immediately see how this can impact on their chances in education, and therefore later in life, So move on, please move. So when looking at why this happens, there are several reasons. All these reasons, they do not exclude each other, but probably they compound each other, or at least they're concomitant. So there is a toxic stress. So people in poverty have a much higher level of cortisol than people who are not in that situation. Stress is a very, very important, very useful mechanism to help us focus on one problem. When we have one problem, we put all our energies into that. But when it is too much, I mean, we all have experienced situations of excessive stress, and then it becomes very difficult to focus on anything because it drowns us. And people in poverty are in constant stress because they have so many problems all around them, each problem compounding the other. Then there is the problem of caregiving. And this is not to say that people in poverty are bad parents, but when you are in the situation of a lot of stress, and very often in a situation of low education, because this is, I mean, there is a very strong correlation. So you can see how the quality of childcare that you can give to a baby is probably different from a situation where the child is at the center of every concern in a well-educated family and so on. So all these has effects on brain development. And then there are also these environmental factors. There is housing, maybe lead in the paint. There is sleep deprivation. So if you sleep 10 people in a room, probably you don't sleep very well. And sleep is very, very important for brain development. And then there is this element of nutrition. And I will come back to that in more detail. So we go on. The next point is about aspirations. We looked at education results or education data from PISA. Please move. PISA shows that children, students, 15 years old, who are in poverty, also low socioeconomic status, they have lower aspirations, even when the results, the school performance is exactly the same as wealthier students. So you see that there is this problem of really, yes, looking at the future, hoping, thinking of your future in positive terms. Please move. All these, what is also important to consider is that all these accumulates over generations. So actually, the reason for carrying out this analysis was also to think of the problems of some groups who are in an extremely marginalized situation and very difficult to tackle. The Roma communities in Europe, for instance. It is different to be in a situation of temporary poverty. For instance, you are a refugee. You are, in a middle-class context in your country, but then there is war. We know, unfortunately, how it's happening now. You leave everything, and then you need to start from scratch in the new place. Of course, you are in a situation of poverty. This affects you, but you have a substantial human capital. Intellectual capital, so many you have education that you can transfer to your children. It is different if you've been in that situation of marginalization and poverty for many generations. Please move. Next. Yeah. So that is what we call the full immersion factor. So it means that in your family history, in your environment, in your connections, everybody is in the same situation of marginalization. This means that you don't really have role models to develop plans for your future. There is a very interesting work on aspirations, Debra Ray, that says the aspirations failure of people in poverty is not so much due to poverty per se, but it is a poverty in combination with the absence of people in your environment that you can use as realistic models. So people who are better off than you are, but still are attainable. Because if you are in a situation where everybody is marginalized, and then you look at celebrities on television, you see it doesn't really work. And this empowerment, the sentiment that your life is not really in your hands, this is transmitted across generations, and this is proved also by research. So the next slides look at the specific issue of nutrition. And as I said, the analysis that we carried out touches upon it in a very marginal way. So what I'm saying here is not in the report, and also I'm not an expert at all. So, but for this seminar, I looked a little bit into literature and into what it says. And so let's, yeah, can you move? So what is clear is that there is a nutrition poverty trap. So malnutrition, that means either undernourishment, I mean, it means either that you don't have food at all, or that the food that you have is not nutritious, you don't have, you know, the good nutrients in your food. This is proved to affect the physical and the mental capacity of people. Then the fact that this mental and physical capacity are affected impacts on productivity, on the economic potential of individuals and maybe of groups, maybe of countries even, which means that they will be more prone to poverty, they will have less opportunities of good jobs and so on. And then poverty will, you know, influence and will drive malnutrition again. So poverty is both a cause and a consequence of malnutrition, among other things. Next. So I also looked more, a little bit more deeply into the relation between malnutrition and cognitive development. There is, I mean, it is almost obvious that intellectual development is connected, or that poverty and malnutrition may cause, you know, problems in intellectual development. But for a long time, and now actually what I looked at is also a bit old. It's a work of the late 90s, but it seems very reasonable and still current. So the reasons for the impact of intellectual development of malnutrition had always for a long time, it had been thought as a sort of straightforward relation. So you don't have, you know, nutrients in your body, the brain needs these nutrients. So, you know, the brain doesn't develop it because it's not fed well. It is actually a bit more complex because at a certain moment, researchers realized that there were also people who were undernourished in middle-class families, maybe for medical reasons. These children, they did not have the same problems of intellectual development as children in poverty who had similar undernourishment. So there is a very important mediation that is carried out by education and stimulation. And I will maybe explain this a bit better in a while. What is also important is that the damage of nutrition on the brain, apparently it can be reversed at least up to a point. There are experiments in Guatemala showing that giving a high protein supplement to people in poverty had a very substantial improvements in education outcomes, even at a later stage. So that is quite important. The next slide will show you. I think I found this graph to be very interesting because it shows how the relation between malnutrition and intellectual development and poverty is complex. So there is a direct relation between malnutrition, brain damage, and then delayed intellectual development, but there is also a very important relation that goes in different ways. So malnutrition depletes energy. So you are tired, you are lethargic. This means you are less prone to learn and to interact with the environment, and this leads to delayed development. There is also the fact that malnutrition leads to illness. Illness leads to delayed development of physical development, and this also leads to a situation where parents or the adults around the child have a lower expectation of this small feeble child. They do not prioritize their learning, and so this goes into these impacts on intellectual development as well. And the whole situation of poverty, where you have a lack of educational and medical resources in general, also leads to also impacts on cognitive development. And at the same time, as we said, poverty reinforces malnutrition. So you see the complexity of the problem, and you see how important it is also to tackle it both through nutrition itself and through education. I also found a very interesting but curiosity next about, so this is a very recent or relatively recent study, 2019, if I'm not wrong, about that frames the problem in a very interesting way. You see now there is all this research on the gut, the microbiome and the brain. And actually, they pose the question in terms of, microbiome and social equity. So if they're speaking here mainly about the US and the food deserts, and they say essentially you have a problem of equal opportunities. If you don't have fibers in your diet, you do not develop this good microbiome that is so important also for the brain and for many other aspects. So it is really a problem of social equity in the end. But well, I just found it quite interesting. Let's move ahead. The next, what can be done about it? What can be done about it? We think that considering all of these is very important for policy development, to make policies more effective. So what research shows is that early intervention is extremely crucial. So, children should be really prioritized in all these interventions, but at the same time, you should not be despaired that, if a child is 6, it is too late. Or, you know, if an adolescent, you cannot do anything about adolescence, because actually brain science shows that there are multiple windows of opportunities. The brain develops and is very plastic until the age of 30, more or less, they say. And adolescence, for instance, is a very, very important moment for reopening opportunities of development of many, many functions. So, I mean, I will be very brief on this, but essentially there are two main elements that should be considered. Next. One is the key role of education. And these are under many, many aspects. So education is really the place where you can build aspirations, where you can build decision making. Next. And oh no, sorry. Okay, sorry. No, let's go back again. I had yeah. And of course, education is very, very important for nutrition as well. So we should really think of education with poverty in mind. There is a very important book, Teaching with Poverty in Mind. And thinking of education with poverty in mind also includes looking at nutrition, because education, school is the place where you can, you know, supplement food intake, of course. You should, you know, make the schools and the educational system understand that if children do not follow the lessons, maybe it is because they are hungry. So, you know, breakfast programs can be very, very important and useful. Education means also re-engaging a relation with the parents, and you know much better than me that the nutrition problem is not only a problem of nutrition is not only a problem of not having the ingredients, but also of know-how, what to do with these ingredients. In the US, but also in many countries in Europe, this is very, very obvious. Maybe it depends on the context a little bit, but the problem in many places is that, you remember Michelle Obama, how she insisted on the vegetable garden and on the, you know, food, nutritious food and the recipes and so on. In some cases, it is important to help education of the parents to understand what kind of food is useful and how to prepare this food in a useful manner. The other very important point is next is this solid support framework. So the main point that we would like to make is that it is not enough to give you know, income, some cash to people, or you know, material support of some kind, and then hope that with this they will get out of poverty. It doesn't work like that if people have been in poverty for a long time. So of course you need material support, you need income, you need food, you need, you know, basic things, but this needs to be framed into a broader, a long-term support, which involves working intergenerational between parents and children, and looking at the multidimensional issues that affect people in poverty. We found two very interesting examples. One is actually in Italy. Next slide, please. This is a PP. This is a program that was developed to prevent the institutionalization of children being taken from their parents. But now, sorry, we see your email, Augustin. Yeah, okay. So, but actually, now it is the basis for the reform of social services in Italy. So it's a program, or the fundaments of the program are applied to all families who receive the minimum income, who have children under 3. And it means that there is a multidisciplinary team around the family that supports, that looks into all the needs of the family together with them, and then accompanies them into addressing all their needs, considering the resources. Similar, next, and then we are finished. This American program developed with the University of Harvard. They say, you know, life is made of many aspects, but they're all interconnected, like in a bridge, like the pillars of a bridge. So, you know, what they do is they use this framework to help people progress on many aspects of their life, set goals, and then achieve those goals over time. I mean, it's a process that have last maybe, you know, 3 to 5 years, but, you know, accompanying people to achieve, to develop on many aspects together. So concluding this, next, please. Complex problems require complex and multidimensional solutions, and nutrition is a very important part of that, of course, depending on the context. It is important to look for protective factors, you know, what can actually, in that, given that situation, what is there that may enable the person to thrive anyway, you know. It can be mentors, it can be places where people feel safe and taken care and supported. And material support is indispensable. It is indispensable. At the same time, it cannot be the only measure. It is not sufficient. So what you need is really a long-term, step-by-step accompaniment, finally to support the definition of the creation of aspirations and hope. Thank you. This is all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Cassio, for your important input on the various effects of poverty, notably in the brain, on aspirations, that can result in this vicious circle of nutrition poverty trap. So to tackle these issues, let's remember early intervention, the key role of education, and support frameworks for long-term solutions. For those who are interested, please consult the GRC report on poverty and mindsets, which was released last year, and I'm sure we can find it online. So this provided the most interesting bridge to our next speaker. In the meantime, I would also like to remind the audience to pose their questions in the Q&A box. I see we already have some. We can address them also later during the round table. So I will now turn to Emanuela Paone, who is psychologist and psychotherapist at La Sapienza Rome University, Paolo Pontino. And we talk about disadvantaged areas and diets, a psychological perspective. Mrs. Paone, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Please, my slide, if it's possible.
Yes.
Thank you. So, thank you to organizers and SAFE members for the invitation, to participate in this webinar. The topics I will be discussing is entitled Disadvantaged Areas and Diets, a Psychological Perspective. Next. So, when we talk about food inclusion accessibility, we need to start with talking about the sustainability of nutrition. Currently, we know the world population grow 18 million people every year. And in 20 years, it's estimated that we'll have 9 billion more people. We have two fundamental questions. Will there be enough food resource for everyone? And the second, we will all know to feed ourselves adequately? Or to answer these questions, we need to understand three important concepts: food safety, food security, and disadvantaged areas. And the interconnection between these three factors and how they influence each other. The other, please. Following, we see in detail what means food safety. Food safety. Food safety for the FAO is defined by a science discipline process or action that prevent food from containing substance that could harm a person's health. So only if food is safe can it contribute to food security and health. When food is not safe, people cannot thrive, hunger and poverty cannot be alleviated, and health life is impossible. What is the aim of food safety? Protect the consumer and guaranteeing at the same time the well-functioning of the common market. So when we consider food not dangerous, when effect over the health on short and long term, you can see on the slide normal condition under which the food product in use by consumer, not dangerous when the about toxic cumulative effect and so on. Important is that the legislation about food is applying on every phase of the food chain, from the production to the delivery. Next, please. What about food security? The definition of food security refers to program, tool and regulation to ensure universal access to food, regardless to factors such as location, social and economic class. But 17,000 new food products on the market each year means that our diet is heavily driven by the food industry. And so the 75% of the food expose the population to opposite food security or the malnutrition. Malnutrition, the definition is a state of imbalance at the cellular level between the supply of nutrient and energy, too little or too much. This is important, too little or too much, and the body requirement to source maintenance, function, growth and reproduction. In these works that we can see, we have three scientific work. The first Lancet 2029, 1 in 5 deaths worldwide is associated with poor nutrition, and 11 million deaths each year are attributable to poor nutrition. The second scientific paper said malnutrition due protein caloric deficiency, undernutrition, affects not just the preserve of the poorest countries. But the important is the third, obesity. Obesity occupies the third place in terms of the cost of for the community after cigarettes and works, and are estimated 1.7 billion overweight people in the world, and 600 of these are obese. Obese is the problem of the our countries, not the poor countries, obviously. Now, but after you can see other data about this problem. Other slide, please. Okay. What we mean about disadvantaged areas? Disadvantaged areas, access to food requires stable physical and economic access to it, as well adequate food utilization. The graph shows the connection between food safety and food security, and what their impact on the population. We can see in the yellow circle poverty and development, and in the center we can find the healthy life and the nutrition. So, caution please, excessive food security can act on the same security, and so, but with an imbalance in the availability and the waste of food reserves. Criteria, what kind of criteria say the FAO for disadvantaged areas? Physical access, economic access, stable access, and proper utilization. Physical access, the food need to be access for anyone, anywhere, and in any condition. Economic access, affordable, that food need sufficient income to purchase it. Stable access, being able to eat sustainability today and tomorrow and in the future. A proper utilization, we have the knowledge and the practice of proper food preparation, eating habits, practice of family, and so on. Next slide, please. When we speak about disadvantaged areas, we need to speak about culture of poverty and social exclusion. In the graph, you can see the research of Eurostat, and you can see the people in the 2021 that are at risk of poverty and social exclusion in Europe. So we can see that the percent of total population in the several European states, in according with Eurostat 2021, are estimated. Europe ranks 10 overall. What means cultural poverty? A set of beliefs that are passed from generation to generation. What is the poverty? The poverty is a chronic pressing need for money and materials. Is a deficiency, and is socially the state it's regard the materials that the person are usual or socially acceptable, amount of the money, amount of the material. So what happened when we stay in a poverty status? We have feelings of severity, insecurity that impact on mindset of people. Mindset like cognitive control, ability, coping, and so the automatic response to a novel answer or less silence. And so we go to the social exclusion. Next slide, please. Now we speak about in specific to insecurity food. Insecurity food exists psychological situation, emotional feelings when the people don't have adequately physical, social, and economic access to nutrition, to food, and dietary needs, and for a good and for an active, healthy life. So we know that across the world, we estimate that over 2 billion people are food insecure, 11% of households. Of these, 8% of the population are in North America and in Europe. We know that food, how we can say the, we know that food insecurity is a first and foremost a nutritional risk that affects nutrition and can lead in various forms of malnutrition like undernutrition, overweight, and obesity. Obesity had a position association with the food insecurity and is stronger in women particularly, and in women from high income a country. Next slide, please. Okay. In this paper, scientific paper, we speak about insecurity food and psychological health. In fact, the real problem of the malnutrition, of the disadvantage, is the feeling of insecurity for psychological health, because is risk of diet related with the chronic disease and outcome in low income adults, specifically with these elements: psychological acceptability, deprivation and limited for food choice, anxiety about food supplies, chronic stress, negative feelings, and depression. In this scientific paper, the authors comparing 147 countries, more and less developed, and they found that there was associated with the poor subjective psychological well-being and stronger relationship in more developed countries than in less developed countries. So we have the insecurity food is strong in the countries with the high status, with the more developed. Next, please. Okay. What kind of psychological factor favoring the insecurity food? Two are under first position, we have disadvantaged areas, you know, because the assumption is that greater variability of the grocery store could reduce the food insecurity, because in low-income neighborhoods with few or no supermarket. So in this work, in this scientific work, Denny, Justin Denny, the author said that poor residents in poor neighborhoods face special heightened threat to well-being. So when we speak about disadvantages, it's important to consider the distribution in this area of the food and how the person can eat safety food, okay? The other psychological factor is parent stress. Parent stress or the family that live in disadvantaged areas. And so particularly the parents have stress about logistical and financial balancing for their family, frustration and the lack of choice associated with the high cost of healthy food. So for this family is not simple to eat good food, healthy food. Stigma of using community resource. Shame of not being able to provide for their one's family. Sadness about their cyclical and chronic food condition and food situation, and inability to provide for their children, so the guilt. Next, please. What kind of implication of food security we have in psychological mental health in a general population? So you can see in adolescent with the family, with the important insecurity food, with the parents, with the high stress, adolescents present in this work of Rani, high level of anxiety, depression, loss of behavioral control, and high psychological stress. And is more high and more frequent in girls from family with severe food insecurity. What happened in the young adult? Nagata find in this work find depression, anxiety, panic disorder, and sleep disorder, particularly difficulty falling asleep and restless sleep. So there are different psychopathology between adolescent and adult, and now we say adult present when we have an insecurity food, present mood disorder and anxiety disorder, and is either in women that men who lives in household with a severity insecurity and that have the parents stress that we speak after before. Sorry. Next, please. So now we can see that is an evidence base that the insecurity food can increase the risk of clinical anxiety and depression. And this evidence should be the starting to develop and implementation for intervention and programs that aim to address both food insecurity and psychological distress. Psychological distress in order to improve nutritional and psychological will bring. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Paone, for addressing the issue from another important perspective, the psychological one, which is as vital as the physical one. You provided us with a lot of food for thought, especially on the metrics of food safety, food security, disadvantaged areas, also creating a culture of poverty and social exclusion, also exacerbated by psychological factors, as living in disadvantaged areas or feeling the parents' stress. Unfortunately, our third and last speaker, Laura Rossi, who is a nutrition researcher and scientific responsible for the National Observatory on Italian Food Waste at CREA, is experiencing some technical problems at her end, and she cannot join us today. But please be reassured that we will share her presentation on the socio-economic barriers for the access to healthy foods and healthy diets. So it is now time to start our roundtable discussion. So the audience can post their questions in the Q&A box, and we shall tackle as many as possible. And I will now give the floor to Luigi Tozzi, who is Deputy Director at SAFE, who will moderate the roundtable. Luigi, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Manon. I'm sorry for my voice, but it's time of the cold for a lot of people. Thank you to both Manuela and Laura for the presentation. Very, very, very interesting. And I have some questions that has come from the other participants. And so I want to start with those questions coming from the participants. Then I will make just other questions that derives from me. So the first question is for Laura Cassio, and I try to read. And what social measures do you recommend policymakers to take to achieve social equity? Are fair redistribution of resources and equal opportunities in education achievable within the current EU economic paradigm? The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, I mean, okay, the question, I think it touches upon, I mean, it is a very broad and interesting question. There is obviously, you know, a huge, I mean, and it is a huge question. So it is, you know, the question of how to address inequality, how to achieve social justice. It is a very political issue, of course, redistribution. I think that there are things that can be done even you know, and of course, I mean, there are issues about costs all the time. There are issues about costs. But what we see also is that there are some opportunities to do the things that we do in a better way, you know, to use the resources that we have and in, you know, just in a more strategic way. So education is something that, you know, is in the national budget in every country. Education is definitely the key to addressing poverty and social exclusion. I mean, it is not the only key, but it is really, you know, the sine qua non, at least it is the very indispensable avenue to that. And what I mean, there are ways, probably what we should do is really think of education in terms of more in terms of equity and access and inclusion and well-being. Also, well-being in education is extremely, extremely important. And it is really a matter of thinking, you know, why we are doing things and can we do the things that we are doing in a better way that is supportive of everybody. So it is a matter of, you know, training teachers to make them, training teachers and school leaders to make them understand the issues around poverty and how, you know, psychological well-being can be very important in school, for instance. It's easier said than done because around education there are always many tensions and there is a tradition, so it is not so easy, but I mean, you know, preventing early school leaving is a very important thing to do, and probably the most important that we can do. And, you know, focusing on education, then we can also look at the broader picture that includes how well fed, you know, the question of food security, food access, food quality that the students receive, for instance. Yeah, so the other thing that I can say is that the European, what used to be the European semester, now it is carried out under the, you know, the National Recovery Fund analysis. It also has a major focus on poverty and inclusion. And that is also the way the EU can support improvement in member states.
Many thanks, Laura. It's a very interesting answers. I would like to make the same questions to Manuela. Maybe she can add something about the education. So as we have seen in both presentations, it's very, very important. So Manuela, the floor is yours if you want to say something. Unmute your mic.
Okay. I think that the education is a part of the problem. So we can speak about the important. The important is that the people can find in the society the attention of their problem. So because the insecurity about the food is a feeling, and so the parents in the first and the adolescents need to propose to the society their problem. And this is not clearly for the society. Now in this period after COVID, after the war, so the school and the educational problem can work on inclusion, can speak to the adolescent, to the young boy about the situation that is changed today. In the past was another situation, economic, and the family was other problem in the past. When we think in 18, so we are adolescent. We was adolescent. It's a different situation in every state. But today, every family has a problem, psychological psychological stress, and psychosocial. So they have a problem with the school, with the quarter where the people live, and is a different situation in the different region in Italy too. Is different if we speak about North or about South Italy. So the school and the education is the magma that can can we use to save the problem?
Many thanks, Emanuela. And one of the things that we know very well is that even if you are poor, you have your mobile with you. And so a lot of messages are diffused, disseminated by the media in general, in the media that you find in your mobile. So, on your opinion, Laura and Emanuela, first Laura, the answer, and then Emanuela, which are the key messages that we can support in media, in general, media, which are the key messages that we have to send to young people to help when they live in poverty and they cannot access to safety and secure food. If you have to make like a slogan, which are the key messages maybe that you can tell them?
I'm really not sure that I can give an interesting or a relevant answer to this. I mean, what is also important to consider is perhaps the diversity of situations. So, I've been living in the US for a some time, and there the situation is very specific, and I find it is different from Italy, of course, but from most of the Europe that I know. Maybe in the UK, maybe in Ireland, you have a bit of similar situations, but and there is really this problem of education about obesity, education about not drinking sodas all the time, about what food is good for you, what food is bad for you. So definitely this education is very, very important. Probably it depends a bit. For instance, I remember that the teacher of my daughter in preschool, she told me that she came from a town in the Midwest, and in her town, the children, so preschool children, they had never seen a potato. So a real potato. So they were eating chips all the time, but they had never seen a real potato, how it looks like. They had never seen vegetables. So so actually in the school they were making all sorts of information about what I don't know, a carrot looks like, what a lettuce looks like, and what you can do with it. So I think it depends very much on the assessment of the needs at the local level. I don't think that in Naples, children do not know, there is probably a problem of, there is a huge problem of poverty, there is a problem of food insecurity, probably. There is probably not this lack of knowledge about what a potato looks like. So maybe this also needs to be adapted to the context and to an assessment of the needs.
Many thanks, Laura. It's very interesting what you told us. And Emanuela, I know you're both of you, Manuela and Laura, are not media managers, so it's a very strange question that I made. But some messages that some stereotypes, that we can anyway send to young people.
Yes, thank you for the question. And I think that when we speak about media, we need to speak about stigma. because when we have the slogan about the food, about the weight, about the body, we have only a slogan, but the boys, the girls read this slogan influenced by their situation at home. So they respond to these words, this proposed, this from the TV, from the media, not from the society or from the school, from the media. They respond with their basis, their parents, their family situation. So we have more psychopathology, different in different situation and different ambience, like anorexia, like orthorexia, like obesity, but those not are the directly correlate with the media. They are influenced by the parents' stress, by the parents' situation. This is the psychological lecture. So we don't find the media, we find the ambient, the neighborhood, we find the how the family can help the young people with their social culture, their and so their status.
Thank you, Manuela. I see Floriana.
Luigi, sorry,
do
Luigi,
you want to?
Yeah. I just find your question very interesting, and it comes in my mind through safe experience about media and communication and adolescents, or using their mobile for the time is the marketing from industry, which is excessive. And imagine, by living in a stressful situation with poverty, etc., you receive the most funny, fantastic, cool message by eating certain type of unhealthy food, which is fantastic, great, etc. And I think that gives a lot of influence to, and we realize that, say, if we try at EU level to reduce the possibility of certain time of the day, above all from kids, to receive this kind of message, but was really, at the moment, EU legislation didn't give us the possibility to stop and not giving such a type of message. But I think that's an enormous influence on the media of teenager. Thank you.
Thank you, Floriana. Sorry for you speaking. I'm sorry. Yes, but we live now in a very different case. You know, we are in. We have talked about the education, how the message we have to give to young people. Now, Floriana has suggested something, Emanuela too. I mean, the COVID crisis and the world that we have now, as are certain cases where the poverty is coming in a certain way. So the families, you always say the family is very, very important, not to give messages or to give stress, especially Manuela, I saw in your presentation. So how can we help families that are going in a very certain way to poverty without anything? Okay, education is something that you can program, you can do for each year, but in the situation that we have after the COVID and after this war are different as sudden. So what can we do for families to support their children and their young adolescents? Thank you. Manuela, do we want to? It's a very complicated question, I know. Manuela, open your mic, please.
The question is an important question, but the answer is difficult because now is a strange period. The COVID is there. The war is there. The gas, we can use the gas like in the past. So what kind of period of epocha of period is this? What we don't know, we can say to the young, to the adolescents, and adolescents know the problem of the adult to answer this question. So we underestimate the adolescents. The adolescents are intelligent. The adolescents have had studied with COVID in the house, without friends, without the holidays, and so they know the poverty situation, you know. So we can have questions to us, like parents, us like adults, no? So we know the poverty. How I can help a power if I don't know the poverty? But now I am poverty. Yes, now I'm poverty. Is a cultural, no? Is a cultural thing. Is a cultural sensibilization, not money sensibilization, a cultural sensibilization. So the legislation need to use psychological arms of sensibilization, not for money, for food, for not only for money, for food, but for to change the vision of poverty in the population, because now the population is growing, the poverty is growing in the population. So.
Okay, thank you, Emanuela. Laura, do you have any suggestions about this question? What can we do? You know, you have talked about education, but in these certain cases, how can we cannot not program any education?
I mean, so for a while I was managing a FEAD program. You know, of course, the FEAD program, and you know how the program was conceived, the history of the program. Originally, it was a program that was part of the agricultural programs, and it was a way to use the surplus of production, actually. And then it became a program of its own, changing the head and changing really the philosophy, and it became a program, a social program. So there, what is very clear was that the distribution of food, I mean, and we know that distribution of food, the food aid is very important, and actually what the FEAD does is just a drop in the ocean. It is a very small contribution to the actual needs. But there, what is also important is that this distribution should be accompanied by some educational measures. So you can have, I mean, of course, when you are distributing food to the homeless, that's it. You just give a meal. But when you can give a meal, you can provide you know, information, social assistance, and so on. But when you give a package of food to a family, then it may be very useful to accompany it with some educational measures, depending on the possibility and depending on the needs, of course.
Thank you, Laura. I take the opportunity of your speech because SAFE is going to do in this same Food for Inclusion project part project is called a healthy meal, we try to let poor families go to the restaurants with a very cheap price, or gratis. It depends on the restaurants, of course, and to give them the opportunity to have a normal day, so to be included in this way with the other people that are in the restaurants without any other problem. And within this opportunity, we give also some flyers and some forms. We give them also the information about how they have to eat, so how they can have food safety and healthy food in particular. So this is in line with all the project we have making this webinar in this context, and I'm very happy to hear from you that our initiative, the project, is in line with all the things that we have seen during this webinar. Manuela, you want to add something, because I see you disappeared and now you appeared again. Okay, now you don't want to add anything. I have just a little question, last, I think, just for Emanuela, that we have received, and this just a second. We have seen that there are differences between food consumptions and food utilizations in relation to a person's nutritional status. Could you give some more information on this issue?
Luigi, I speak about consumption and utilization like a psychological version, obviously. What two different words means in a psychological setting. But I spoke in my slides about food security and food safety. So there are similar, not same, similar words. But we can use consumption when there is food waste, when we can have a choice of the use of the food. But the food utilization is near to the necessary eating habits, the capacity of family to provide the food and use the food, cooking the food in a correct. So we can speak about, I think, in psychological means, that food utilization, we can think about food safety. And so we speak about svantage area and the culture, the different topics to cooking, to eat, to the tradition in the different regions. So food consumption, we can speak about food security. So the industry need work to guarantee a good food, a healthy food.
Thank you, Manuela. I remember that you talked also about the kind of distribution, no, in the disadvantageous area.
Yes.
If we think now, the restaurants that you can have in the disadvantageous areas are the cheaper. So McDonald's, and the same for the retailers are all the hard discount, soft discount in general, and where the prices are less, of course. They can say you can find a Michelin stars restaurant in these advantageous. So the opportunity to the food, to the healthy food, is very, very difficult. That's why we try to make this kind of healthy meal, this project. So the questions are finished for me and from the participants. I don't know if Laura, do you want to add something? No. Manon, the floor is. I thank you. I'm so sorry. I thank you all, our two speakers. The very had given us a very, very, very interesting point of view, different point of view, and the implication on the mindset is very important, and we have to take it really in consideration. So from this webinar, we will try also to write a position paper and to give to the Commission, to the institution, European institution, but also the national, I think, we can do. And so thank you very, very much for your presentations and speaking. Manon.
Well, thank you very much to all of you for such a lively discussion. Thanks to our speakers for sharing their thoughts and ideas. Thanks to our audience also for their relevant questions. And thank you, Luigi, for moderating the roundtable. So our event is now getting to a close, and I would like to invite again Floriana Cimmarusti, the Secretary General of SAFE, to take the floor for some closing remarks. Please, Floriana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Manon. While we were talking, I was thinking what SAFE is really doing to resolve or to try to find some solution to all those problems. It was very interesting to hear about the anxiety, about the stress, family being in a poverty situation, being in a disadvantaged area. And it was very interesting listening either from Emanuela or from Laura, how much this influenced their mental health, their perception, and the way they live. Because living in a poverty situation give this enormous amount of stress to parents that, of course, get to their kids. SAFE, I must say, has some experience on this view that this was an issue we're trying to, not to resolve, but we are trying to support in different ways for many years. We had this project called Tackling Adolescent Obesity, where actually Emanuela was supporting us from some years ago about this project, where we're trying really to help adolescents who were in obesity situation in different schools, where disadvantaged school, we were trying to give inclusion to support those kids, those adolescents who were living this situation of obesity in disadvantaged area. And we had a lot of positive feedback and experience on our project. In the meantime, from more than 7 years, SAFE goes to disadvantaged school to train kids. And what we realized, we train more than 1,500 kids only in Belgium. What we realized, because many times was myself who was going to the school, is that when you go to school from disadvantaged area, and when you go to school from rich part of the city of Brussels, the way the kids know and are informed about food is completely different. So we realized, for instance, in Uccle, which is the area actually where I do live, when we used to go to school in this area of Brussels, you saw those kids, they knew everything. They know how to read food labeling. No, not exactly as good as we were trying to teach them, but they know really a lot. And they ask certain type of question, etc. When we're going to disadvantaged area, we realize how much kids that, of course, were very interesting, and actually they wanted to teach their parents, which is what has happened. The type of question we're asking you was more basic. So it means at home, with the stressful situation we are living in, There is no time to go and say to your kids, oh, read the food labeling. Oh, look at this. And, oh, this is not healthy. Because the stress is so much that family cannot spend time and hours training their kids because the stress is so high that this is not their priority. So in that sense, the project of SAFE, by going and continue going to those schools, it's really important. And I remember once the director of a school came to me and said, do you mind to give a training to the parents? Because they listen a lot from their kids, what to eat and not to eat, but they're completely lost because nobody trained them too. So SAFE passed to train kids, to train parents, teacher from school for many years. We're still doing this now. We're outside Brussels. We go in the area of Liège and other area, and we're bringing this in 15 other member states through the very successful experience we have in Belgium. So again, education, fundamental. Understanding the stressful situation the parents live and trying to support in that sense. And in this way, our project on food waste, distributing food waste to people in need, it is important too, because we can give the idea for a moment that on Thursday evening, for instance, in Brussels, we have Thursday evening that we give food waste to people in needs. They know they can have a healthy, decent meal. So when I think like that, I think what you explained to us and in detail, SAFE is really trying to support those people. And we thanks, of course, the European Commission, because without them, without the funding, this would have never been possible. So just to conclude, thank you so much, Emanuele and Laura, to be with us. I would like to thank my team, Luigi, Manon, Federica, and Agostine, to be with us, supporting us. I wish you a nice day to all of you, and let's continue working together. Let's continue supporting people in needs, and above all in the near future, where actually it seems, as Emanuela was saying, that there is always more and more, and we are all more and more poor actually, and having difficulties even to pay just the bill of our house or our apartment. Okay, thank you so much to all of you. I think we can conclude the seminar, the workshop, and thank you, Manon. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Floriana, and thanks to all of you also for attending the webinar. SAFE was really delighted to host it today in the frame of the Food for Inclusion project supported by the European Social Fund of the European Union. And for those who would like to rewatch it, the recording will be available on SAFE's website, YouTube, and also social media channels very soon. Thank you again, and until soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.